Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program, Assemblyman Tom McKevitt. Tom McKevitt represents the 17th Assembly District. That includes parts of Nassau County. We want to thank you folks on Long Island for joining us. And Tom McKevitt, nice to see you.
Great to be here, Mike.
We'll be getting caught up on where the budget talks are at the state capitol and why you folks should be paying attention. A lot gets discussed in these final budget negotiations that end up impacting you folks, mostly in the pocketbook and wallet. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that discussion. We're going to start, though, with what the legislature is doing this week. A bit of a delay because of that big snowstorm that kind of socked in upstate New York last week. But there's going to be some elections of state regents members coming up later on today as we tape this show.
And it's funny, people for many years don't realize there actually is an election for the Board of Regents. And the Board of Regents has been around since the late 1700s. It's actually the policy-making body for our educational system in New York State. And when you look at it, the Board of Regents has a large amount of power as to what the curriculum is, regarding certifications, lots of things on how the policy is determined. And for many years, the way that there have always been Regents elections, but the way it works is that each member of the legislature gets one vote. So whether you're a member of the Senate or whether you're a member of the Assembly, you each can have one vote in order to determine what happens. So what really is the Assembly majority, the Assembly Democrats, have essentially been hand-picking the regents for many, many years because they have the large amount of votes. And for many years, people just ignored it. They just went about its way, and for the most part, we felt they were really, responsive to the Assembly Speaker. And then something called Common Core came up a couple of years ago. And people start being aware that the Board of Regents does set policies and does set these owners testing policies, which had nothing to do with real educational values. So one thing, actually, a couple of members of our caucus, I'll say Al Graff and Ed Ra, give them the credit, said, hey, listen, we're going to have a Regents election. Let's contest these elections. We're not going to just give a rubber stamp to whoever the majority says. And we started contesting them. And when we started doing it was, for years, when an incumbent regent, they get 5-year terms. Whenever the terms would come up, they would automatically get renewed. That's where it was. Well, all of a sudden, incumbent regents weren't getting reelected anymore because the spotlight was shined on them, that they have a responsibility to make sure what is good for the people, the educators, and the students in the state. And I think many people felt the former board was not doing that anymore. So we brought a contested election system, and there's been a great turnover in the Board of Regents the last several years. But I think with it, you've seen responsiveness. And instead of just blindly saying we're going to do these Common Core testing made by this outside company that we spend millions of dollars for badly written tests, now we're actually going to have a process where we're going to be transparent. We have interviews to the public. We're going to debate on the floor who should be in the regents. And we're going to continue that today. And I think that's one of the better things our conference has done in the last several years.
It's an interesting point because for years those elections had been uncontested because it was a fait accompli here at the state capitol. You just knew who was going to be selecting the members of the Board of Regents, but there has been so much controversy, so many questions asked about education policy in the state, as you said, as a result of Common Core, but other things too. So you think this has actually led to a spotlight, I guess, put on the Board of Regents and who's getting elected?
Right, and I think rightfully so. I mean, again, they have an immense amount of power. Give an example. The governor a couple of years ago had stuffed in the budget this teacher evaluation system, which was going to hire or fire teachers or determine whether they can keep their jobs based upon tests, regardless of what type of students you taught. If you taught special education students, obviously they're not going to do as well in the tests. These teachers could possibly get fired because of that. And so the Board of Regents actually put a moratorium on that and says, even though the governor says this is what should be the case, we're going to try looking at this on a case-by-case basis and look at what type of students you're teaching and making sure your students are improving, not just a cookie-cutter-sized test and put on every student and say, if you do great, you keep your job. If not, we're firing you. And that's not what the educational system is supposed to be about.
There's so many layers to the education onion in New York State with the legislature, with the executive, the governor's office, the state education department, the local school boards, the teachers, the teachers' unions. I mean, there's so many inputs here.
Yes.
But it is the Board of Regents that sets the policy, right?
Exactly. Certainly is. So we'll be putting that spotlight on them today and looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we'll be anxious to hear how that goes. And, of course, the people who have regents that are representing. It's a regional thing, the regents, right?
They go by what's called judicial districts. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Our Long Island regent was elected a couple of years ago, so now we have regents, and one in Manhattan and two in a couple of the upstate regions out by like Elmira and out by the Finger Lakes. Those regions are up today. But there are several of those, and there are several at-large regions as well, represent the entire statewide. But today we're just dealing with Manhattan and a couple of upstate geographic seats.
All right, well, we will wait to see what happens. Now, back to the idea of the state budget negotiations. This budget's due to be in place in just a couple weeks. As we tape this program, by the time you folks see this, it might all be said and done. But the big heavy talks are going on now. The governor started things off in January with his budget proposal. Right. Now the Assembly has passed a budget proposal. The Senate has passed a budget proposal. The joint legislative budget conference committees are starting to meet, and the serious talks are underway. What should the people at home who are watching this today be looking for as they see the newspaper headlines and hear reports about what's coming out of Albany?
I think there are a couple of issues that are coming up as far as concerned. And what problem with the budget is the budget's supposed to be about money and finances, how much school aid. The biggest factor I look at when I look at the budget is how much school aid my school districts are getting. And I've said very clearly in the past, when I think we're getting fair increases, then I'll vote for the budget. If the aid to my schools are not fair, I don't vote for the budget. And I think my records produce that in the past. I think in the last couple of years we've gotten all right aid. Not as much as I'd like, but certainly not cuts in that regard. So that's number one thing. Number two is how much aid does come to our local governments. Another part of it. One thing the governor has been putting out there is that he's been promoting a middle-class tax cut to be passed in this budget. And what really gets quite interesting about it is that we passed that last year. So, the governor is trying to put the spotlight this year, and it's quite mysterious to me because it's already been done. So that's a non-issue as far as I'm concerned.
There are some who say the budgets have kind of morphed into not being totally focused on numbers, but policy and maybe some issues like people are talking about this Uber issue and Lyft and the ride-sharing services. That seems like that should just be a debate on a bill as to whether upstate and areas out in Long Island, areas outside New York City should be allowed to have it. But that's being tied into the budget this year.
And this governor started that many years ago. Again, he started with the certain teacher evaluation systems. He put a lot of policy issues stuffing in the budget to try deal with in that instance. And one thing we've heard a lot about right now is certainly Uber. Whether Uber will have a statewide licensing. And the issue with Uber is we've had taxi cabs for decades on Long Island, New York State, and you go in a municipality, you get a license, and you operate. And Uber just doesn't want to go that route. They'd rather get a statewide license so they don't have to go town by town, village by village, whatever it may be. And there may be some merit to it. But my concern is now we may have a two-tiered system, whereby Uber will get one system, and then the local taxi cab system will have a different system. So to me, there's got to be some sort of uniformity, some level playing field. That's not what Uber wants, but you're right. There's been a lot of talk about putting Uber in the budget. How that quite happened, I'm not quite sure, but there's very good chance that when we do the budget next week, that there will be some sort of some Uber legislation or dealing with these ride-sharing companies at this point.
It's people just talk on and on about how great Uber is. They've all had these experiences traveling to different places and experiencing Uber and just can't understand why it wouldn't be allowed in places in New York State outside of New York City.
Well, but the fact is they are allowed. If they want to go to a local municipality and get the license one by one, they can do it. We've had taxi cabs for years. They're doing something very similar to a taxi cab. Again, Uber just wants to do it in a different way. Again, there may indeed be some merit to that. But we just have to make sure that it's going to be equal to everyone and not Uber saying we have an easier process and we're just going to put every taxi cab out of business because we so choose. So that's where it is.
There's also talk in this budget about fixing something apparently that got changed in the last year or two, the STAR program. Yes. Very popular. School tax relief credits. Mm-hmm. It got changed to be some kind of a rebate check program that I guess hasn't been working out too well.
If you're paid your taxes and you're expecting a rebate and you're waiting for the check, you've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And I tried calling tax and finance for some idea when these checks will come, and they will not tell me. They won't tell me, give me an idea. So, what happened was you used to get the STAR rebate on your school tax bill. Here it is. The state would give the money to the school district and be printed on your school tax bill. This is what your taxes would have been, but because you're getting the STAR program, you'll pay often $1,000 less. The governor insisted in this program last year, well, now you're going to pay your full amount, and now you get a credit on your income tax return. and you should get with the check refunded to you at some later point. And I'm not seeing the money flow correctly. So from my perspective, it wasn't broken the way it was. It was transparent the way it was. People saw it the way in the past. My attitude is put it the way it was for 20 years instead of this way the governor's doing it, because the way the governor's doing it is just not working. No way around it. I don't think anyone can explain that's working right now. It's not.
And do you think that it will be fixed in this budget that's coming?
I'm optimistic. I think the legislature is rather unified in this, that this may have been some way of the governor trying to do it, but the people aren't being served. The people aren't getting the money which they deserve, and that's the biggest complaint.
There's so little the legislature is ever unified on. That's it must have been screwed up somehow for that to happen.
But there's another area we actually have been fortunately unified on, which is direct care workers.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly, when the governor decided to do his minimum wage increase and do fast food workers, and he decided that the fast food workers are the most valued employees in the state of New York. Again, I'm not saying they shouldn't get a raise. Certainly there's some compelling argument towards it. But you then get fast food workers getting raises, and you have people working in for the developmentally disabled, working for the very vulnerable population where you want very good employees, and you'll have a fast food worker making $15 an hour, and you're going to have these workers making $12 an hour. And these agencies, number one, it's not fair to these people who are caring for our most vulnerable populations, number one. But number two, they will not be able to keep their people working for them if they're going to find jobs higher in fast food places. So I think almost certainly both the Assembly and the Senate is going to fix that. We're going to make sure the money goes to these programs so they can pay their workers a fair wage. And at least they're not competing with your local, McDonald's or Burger King for these group of workers when we really need them to go and care for these people.
One issue area in which there, again, does not seem to be that kind of agreement amongst members of the legislature. The governor put forward an idea having to do with free college tuition for state and city universities. Not uniform across the board, well received, I don't think, by this legislature.
Not quite. And one thing I've learned in at least my time in office and before that, Mike, is that there is no such thing as free. Someone's got to pay for this someplace. And again, his program is designed simply as a political program. The governor had Bernie Sanders there in order to get on his platform. I think this is a great thing. Again, there are issues regarding student debt you can address, but the way the governor does the program doesn't do it that way. Listen, it can be very hurtful to private colleges we have in the state, which educate tens of thousands of students in this state as well. As a matter of what his budget originally said is that if your private college increases tuition by more than $500 a year, the student will lose all your TAP aid. He's not going to punish the college; he's going to punish the student. So, to me, again, this is a program which is not, uniformly applied, is not good for policy of the state. And again, I'm not saying that we should be expanding TAP to include more students, but just, his way of doing that, this free tuition, is neither free nor beneficial to our, system we have.
And I've heard some legislators actually argue that if you make a free college education, if you hand a free college education to a student, it devalues the diploma that they get. In some, that you could look at it saying, well, they didn't have to work for it or understand the value that's attached to it, and they just went ahead and got it, and maybe the education itself drops in quality.
But this is how the education's also going to drop in quality. Fortunately, I have some University of Albany students who work for me in my office up here. It's nearby, and they're excellent workers. They're political science students. The average freshman political science class at U Albany has 700 students in the class. And by providing this so-called free tuition, the governor's going to attract more students into the classrooms, but you're not increasing staff, you're not increasing resources. What's the quality of this education going to be? Let's put 900 students in a class. Is that going to make that a better education? Or should we put real investment in the SUNY to make it one of the great competitive public colleges in the world? And that's not what this program does. It allows more people to come in without improving the quality for not only those who are there, but quality for the future. And that's not a beneficial education at the end of the day.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg on some of the issues that are included in this budget. There's a lot more, $150-some billion in this budget.
163, actually, if you count it.
163
billion.
Check back in a couple hours. It may go higher.
Yes.
Tom McKevitt, thanks for joining us today. We'll be keeping in touch with you about how this budget process plays out. We hope you folks will be able to join us for that. It'll be our next edition of Assembly Calendar.